Hello, I'm the Game Professor, and welcome to Games as Lit 101. Well, the channel has recently reached 10,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank all of you enough for that. When I first started this show, I was happy to have 100 views on any given video, and now apparently 10,000 of you liked what I had to say enough to want more of it, and that just makes me happier than I can describe. So I asked some of you what you would like to see in celebration of this occasion, and the surprisingly overwhelming response was a list of 5 games that have changed my life in some way. So, here we are. First, a few ground rules. For one, this is not to be confused with a list of my top 5 favorite games. When it comes down to it, the ability of any given work of art to change or challenge someone isn't necessarily directly related to how good it is. So some of my favorite games haven't really changed me all that much, and some of the games on this list probably wouldn't make it into my top 10 or even 20 video games that I've played. This is a list of games that have changed my life, not just games that I think are really good. Furthermore, the fact that we're talking about games that have changed my life makes this a very personal list. Some of these games might not make much sense to you for them to be here, but when it comes down to it, wherever I was at that time in my life, or based on certain ideas or concepts presented in these games that may have been new to me, they changed me as a person. All that to basically clarify that this list is not about the best games of all time, or even a list of games that are likely to change your life. This is about my own experience with these games. I'm just waiting for commenters to talk about how I missed one or another game that really deserved to be on this list or something. I just want to avoid that in the first place, so I'm laying that down right now. Second, I'm going to focus entirely on games that have changed my outlook on life or shaped future events of my life in a major, tangible way. I can make an entire other list of games that have shaped my view of video games as a medium and an art form, but that would be another list. For the purposes of this video, I'm only going to include such games if they ended up having such a profound effect on my life as a whole that they changed the course of it. So without further ado, let's get into the top 5 games that have changed my life.
Number 5. Halo. When the Xbox came out, I was a stupid kid with a PlayStation complex. I expanded it to Nintendo when I got a GameCube, but I still didn't like Microsoft's weird new console until my cousin invited me over to play this cool new game he got. I had also never played a first-person shooter before this point and did not expect to enjoy it. Thankfully, he didn't introduce me the way many do, by plopping me in a multiplayer match and demolishing me till I never wanted to play multiplayer games ever again. He started up the co-op campaign. I immediately fell in love. It was exciting, the graphics were amazing for the time, I loved the sci-fi setting, and reeled as the plot twists assaulted me in the latter half of the game. In terms of my gaming experience, it opened me up to a new genre and was the first step in getting me out of the stupid console wars phase of my childhood. But that's not the point of this list. It kickstarted 2 things that affected how I would interact with both video games and the people in my life. Firstly, it was the beginning of my love for playing through video game stories with people I care about. Since that day, I've played through countless games, even single-player ones, with family, friends, and other loved ones at my side, experiencing it together. And this has not only been a formative element of many relationships in my life, but even a major element in my marriage and the dating relationship that led up to it. Secondly, my love for Halo's campaign eventually did get me into the multiplayer scene, which inspired no shortage of LAN parties in my youth, and most importantly, eventually got me into online gaming. I generally value online multiplayer less than a good story, but the ability to stay connected to the cousin I first played Halo with while he was in the military, and to keep having fun with my wife even when we're apart, is something I treasured dearly, and the original Halo was the start of all of it for me. Number 4. Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. This is one of the weirder ones on this list. I mean, Aria of Sorrow is a great game, probably my favorite Castlevania game, but I wouldn't generally describe it as life-changing. But it did have an effect on me. In my gaming life, this was one of the first games to make me realize that smaller games could be just as good as bigger ones, as I laid on my bed playing this on my Game Boy Advance while my shiny new GameCube sat in the corner. Also, its sequel, Dawn of Sorrow, was one of the first video game soundtracks I fell completely in love with. But it also affected the way I viewed the world, in a way I didn't expect or even really realize in retrospect until I was thinking about this list. The game takes place in the near future, and Dracula is set to resurrect, and the protagonist is sucked into this conflict for reasons he doesn't understand. The story is pretty simple, with some interesting concepts and a lot of angst, but it introduced one idea that I, at the time I played it, had never considered before. The main character asks at one point why it was inevitable for Dracula to resurrect again and again, no matter how many times he's killed. The answer he's given is that it's a matter of balance. Good and evil cannot exist without the other. Without evil, we couldn't even understand the existence of good, because to one extent or another, we understand anything by virtue of knowing its opposite. Now, this is a pretty basic idea, and in all fairness, my philosophical and religious beliefs don't really accept the idea that evil and good must inherently both exist in balance necessarily, but this was the first time I was exposed to such an idea, and it informed a lot of my thinking as I went into the intellectually crucial periods of high school and college. This reasoning is much of why I even bothered looking into viewpoints and worldviews other than my own, and started exploring ideas outside of my own beliefs, because I was made aware that I couldn't even fully understand my own worldview if I didn't understand the others that surround and contradict it. I find it interesting how oftentimes the first work to introduce an idea to us becomes influential in our lives, even if the idea is nothing new or has been more effectively done elsewhere. Just goes to show you never know what could be instrumental in someone else's experience or development. Number 3. Final Fantasy VII. By the time I finally caved into a friend's raving to play this game, the idea of stories in games wasn't new to me, but I had never played a game that gave it this much attention. I distinctly remember the flashback scene to Cloud and Tifa's childhood near the beginning, thinking, wow, this game has stopped me completely and is developing its characters. This music is so peaceful, the moment's so intimate, I've never seen a game do this before. Of course, games had done it before, but I hadn't played them. The mere fact that Final Fantasy VII gave its story more than in-game dialogue and occasional cutscenes blew me away, and having loved reading since I was a child, it was a revelation to me. This is one of those games that I'm including on this list because of its effect on my outlook toward video games. That's not the intent of the list, as I said before, but the effect this game had on my understanding of the medium and its storytelling potential has directed all my ambitions and studies, directing my passion for this medium and thus, in a notable way, the direction I want to take my life. So, yeah, I would be remiss to deny it a place here. Number 2. Katawa Shoujo. This is an interesting one to talk about in just about any context, because the very nature of the game was the subject of some controversy and still turns some people off. Katawa Shoujo is a romantic visual novel that takes place at a school for special needs students, and true to the tendencies of this genre, it has some pretty graphic sexual content. When it first released, many criticized it as exploitative disability fetish porn. I don't think that reading holds up to scrutiny in the slightest, considering the game has 5 different stories, each of which require about 5 hours of reading and include 2 sex scenes, which can be turned off anyway. And beyond that, the stories told here are actually really, really good, and one of them in particular hit me during a part of my life where I empathized strongly. Perhaps even a little too strongly. Gonna have to spoil the ending of one of the routes here, so you've been warned. The game is free if you want to just go play it. One of the love interests, Hanako, has burns all over her body from a car crash and suffers from crippling anxiety and clinical depression. If you pursue her, the whole game is basically about learning how to be supportive and understanding of her emotional difficulties, and as with all the routes of this game, it's presented very well and displays a lot of respect for the things she deals with. Now, the thing to understand about my experience with this game was that I played it in college while in a relationship with a girl who had very similar problems, which means I was trying to learn how best to love and support a woman facing these issues while I was playing a game about learning how best to love and support a woman facing these issues. I related a lot, and in a lot of ways I think I projected the anxiety and stress of that experience onto the game itself. Near the end of Hanako's route, some difficult things have been happening for her after a while of improvement, and you're given the choice to try and go help her or let her work it out on her own. As someone who always wants to help a friend in need, often even to the detriment of my own mental and emotional well-being, I knew what I wanted to do, and I also knew from my very recent real-life experience that it would be a bad idea. That she could take care of herself, and coddling her, rushing to her rescue like I didn't trust her to deal with her own problems would be the worst thing I could do. So I didn't. I rarely felt that level of stress from a video game, and thankfully it paid off. I don't think I could have handled the bad ending of her route at that time. Even with the good ending, I did not go back to play the other routes of the game for months after that. Obviously, the game had a big emotional impact on me, but more than that, that experience played a role in my understanding of such issues as I tried to love and support someone who dealt with them, as well as, unfortunately, when the 2-year relationship came to a regrettable but necessary close. That was one of the most difficult and formative eras of my adult life, and this game played a part. Number 1. Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back. Alright, I know this is a weird one, especially after a game that just emotionally affected me in a major way, but when it comes down to it, I couldn't give the top spot in this list to anything but the first video game I ever loved. My love and study of video games has been a major factor in a lot of decisions and pursuits in my life, and while this wasn't the first game I ever played, it was the one that really started me on the path I'm on today. I could potentially attribute this to the adventure games made by Humongous Entertainment when I was a child, since I did love those growing up, but Crash Bandicoot 2 was the first game I played through over and over and over, the first game I completed 100%, the game that made me want my first console, the game that took video games from a thing I enjoyed to something I really got invested in. I also may have tried writing a novelization of the first game, but that's neither here nor there, and no, you don't get to read it. No one does. Ever. It wouldn't be on a list of the best games ever made. It might be somewhere on my favorites, but even then, I've played many games I would say are better than this. But I do love the series, the actual entries in it at least, and without Crash Bandicoot 2, I can't say for sure that I would have pursued video games like I have, or come to appreciate their narrative potential, or taught about them, or made this series. It kind of started it all, so it only makes sense to name it the most influential game in my life.
So there you have it, 5 games that have changed me as a person. I just need to say thank you once again to all of you. When I first started this show 2 years ago, 10,000 subscribers was a theoretical future possibility that I didn't dare even hope for, and you have made it a reality, and still climbing. You've encouraged me, you've challenged me, and you've made this show worth doing. You're the best. As always, you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter via the links in the description, and you can check out my Patreon if you want to help support the show so I can continue to do hopefully more and cooler things with it. So, thank you once again all so much, and I'll see you again soon.